Good evening, friends. Welcome to you all for Karnataka ENT Innovative Masterclass Series guest program. I'm proud to say this is a 25th program, Silver Jubilee program of guest programs. Okay, several luminaries from India they took part in this, and they educated all of us. That was great thing, great of them. And today we have my good friend, a senior friend, a well wisher. Dr. Mrityunjay Bilgi, with his innovative concept, with his a lot of experience, is talking on uh, a special topic, that is all striders are not congenital pediatric airway problems. And we have to moderate this session, Dr. Simab Sheikh, and he doesn't need any introduction at all. He has become a kind of unanimous with Indian OS obstetric sleep apnea syndrome scenario. And with him, another luminary, Dr. E.V. Raman. I think, like in my eyes, one person who has maximum amount of pediatric airway problem in India, I think Dr. E.V. Raman.
Yes,
Also
yes,
he's conducting
agree.
so much work, and workshops with in association with the Cincinnati group regularly every year, and I would say 3C, continuity, credibility, and consistently is doing it. But I really congratulate him, and he's with us today. It's really, matter of great honor for all of us. And so is Dr. Sandeep Bansal from PGH Chandigarh, and also he is, with a lot of experience in obsessive sleep apnea syndrome. I just, I gave him a call very late, and just one call, he said, "Yes, boss, I will be there." I'm so lucky, so honored to have Dr. Sandeep Bansal sir here. And from you guys, I want a independent webinars in the future. See, our webinars are attended by a global audience, and you guys, should be teaching to a global audience in the coming days. So please do contribute. This is my sincere request to all of you. And Dr. Suhail Hassan, another, a good friend of mine, a well-wisher, but unfortunately, he is busy with some OPD work somewhere in the distance. He will take some time to reach to home and get into the this thing seminar. So, okay. With this, I'll hand it over to Dr. Simab Sheikh. He will give a brief introduction about Bilgi sir, and then start. What I'm going to do is for better audio video quality and to improve the bandwidth, I'm going to mute all others, also to decrease a lot of audio disturbances. Okay, during the talk, only Dr. Simab's voice will be there, Bilgi sir's video will be there, all else will be muted. And once the talk is over, then videos of all the panelists will come on and their voices will come on. Meanwhile, all the participants, they can post their questions onto the chat area, which the moderator will note down, and he will do a very, very lively discussion. And we are aware of that Simab Sheikh's capability, how he conducts a this thing, any panel discussion. Okay, it's going to be very lively. Welcome you all. Okay, what I'm going to do is I'm going to mute all. Yes, and this is going to mute everybody. I'd like to again unmute Bilgi sir and Simab sir. Okay. Uh, and also I'm going to make Simab's a co-host. Yes, he will be co-host, but I'm going to stop his video for better bandwidth. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Yes, sir. Bilgi sir, you can share your
Yeah,
screen, and Simab sir will start us this
yeah.
thing. Yeah. Yes, sir.
Is my screen, I mean,
No, not
my
yet.
presentation is on? No.
No,
Not
you have to
yet.
share the screen.
Yeah, Dr. Prahlad's screen has to go and yours has to come in.
Yeah.
And good evening, everybody, one and all. Welcome here. A very big thank you to Dr. Prahlad for having us here in the first place and organizing a very different kind of a webinar which will help us understand a lot of things. He's given me the task of giving a brief introduction for Dr. Bilgi, and unfortunately, it cannot be a brief introduction for this gentleman whom I have known for about over 15, 16 years now, and I've seen him and the kind of work that he does. And I was very fortunate enough to have invited him to our Pune meet and showcase the kind of work that he does. Now, his work on congenital laryngology or congenital airway is, is massive. And that's what we are wanting him to share over here. We've been trying and prodding him a lot. Even I keep telling him a lot to come and showcase the kind of work that he does, because he's not that, he's a pretty shy person in various ways. Dr. Prahlad has anyway explained, or rather mentioned, his stint at Cincinnati and Alabama, where he has gone and he's picked up all the finer nuances from the people there, including Paul Costello, who's also come to India quite a few times and been with us. And I know the kind of setup that Dr. Bilgi has, which is not short of any institute setup in his own private. So he's got the works with him. He's got the lasers, he's got the jet ventilation, he's got scopes accordingly, all the ones that he needs. He's got a very trained anesthetist with whom he's worked together for so many years, and they know exactly how to look into the pediatric airways. And I think what is more commendable, which I would try to bring out at the end of the meeting without doing too much of talk right now, is how to do this in a private setup. And we have with us, of course, our other friends, Dr. E.V. Raman, Dr. Sandeep Bansal, and Dr. Sohail Hassan. Sandeep and Dr. Raman are both institutionalized in major big institutes doing the same kind of work. So we will try to bring out the differences between private and institutional work. And of course, more importantly, management of these disorders. So without further ado, Dr. Bilgi, the stage is yours. Please take over and we'll listen in.
Are you able to see my screen?
Yes, we can see you and we can hear you very clearly. So
The slide is clean. My projection is seen.
Absolutely clear.
Okay, thank you. Before I proceed, I wish to thank Prahlada for everything he has done for me. He's a good friend of mine. I bring you greetings from Aurangabad. To know even one life has breathed easier because you lived. This is to have succeeded. A famous quote by Ralph Emerson. Now I really thank Lord Almighty for giving me the opportunity in 675 neonates and pediatric age group patients with and make them breathe better. This is one such case. One day, girl child with hypoxemia, biphasic stridor, and neonatologist was not able to intubate the child. They called me, and what I found was a isolated subglottic stenosis, which was admitting. I was able to admit 2 mm scope, not 2.7 mm scope. As it was an isolated event, I did cricoid expansion surgery, and this is the follow-up video of the same girl 5 months after. And this cricoid expansion surgery, what it does to subglottis. This child is now grown and is now 10.5-year-old. Aurangabad is a tertiary care center for neonatologists, and almost 200 beds are dedicated to neonatal care. Stridor is the commonest symptom of reference to me. Respiratory distress, apneic spells, repeated respiratory tract infections, feeding difficulty, and failure to thrive are other indications of reference. Most of my patients are below 4 months of age, of which 80% have some kind of congenital anomaly, the commonest being laryngomalacia. As you all know, stridor is not a diagnosis, it is a symptom. It is a sign of potential respiratory obstruction. Delay in identifying the cause can lead to chronic morbidity or death. So stridor needs to be investigated in each and every case on an emergent basis. And what really helps me, this wonderful tool, flexible bronchoscope, thanks to Professor Shigeru Ikeda, who invented this based on principle of internal reflection. As I said, every child gets referred to me in and around Aurangabad with a referral note saying a case of laryngomalacia. I really don't blame my neonatologists to think laryngomalacia as the cause of stridor the children are affected with. As we know, yes, it is the commonest laryngeal condition affecting the child. But I feel there is a bit of overdiagnosis the way the children are examined. And even I did the same when I had no flexible scope. Macintosh laryngoscopy. Beautiful view, you can see the collapsing larynx, supraglottis as you see in laryngomalacia. The same child examined transnasally with flexible scope, no laryngomalacia. So anyone is serious about congenital airway condition and its management, he has no alternative not to have transnasal flexible scope and the necessary expertise to use it. as proper management is possible only after correct, precise and correct diagnosis. Trying to treat these children with your inferential diagnosis can have fatal outcome. This 11-month-old male child with stridor since birth was being managed as a case of laryngomalacia, admitted in a tertiary care center for 3 episodes of respiratory arrest. And when I scoped the child, everything was fine, but there was this tracheal compression secondary to superior mediastinal cyst. Me and my thoracic surgeon friend decided to operate on. Unfortunately, this child succumbed to severe bout of hemoptysis the evening before we planned surgery. 675 cases evaluated by me all these years. As we expect, laryngomalacia was the commonest condition I'm seeing there. Other than that, vocal cord palsy, subglottic stenosis, interarytenoid cleft, complete recurring stenosis, various cysts like base tongue cyst, epiglottic, retropharyngeal, paratracheal, laryngoceles, conal atresia, tracheomalacia, and so forth. Most of these conditions are isolated event, but in small number of cases, there can be second pathology. If you may miss that, you will fail in your attempt to treat the patient. Along with laryngomalacia, I'm seeing subglottic stenosis, vocal cord palsy, base tongue cyst, laryngeal cleft, unilateral conal atresia, tracheal malicias, pyloric stenosis, esophageal atresia, and good number of cases also had deviated nasal septum with respiratory tract infection. And almost all of my patients, these obstructed children, had laryngopharyngeal reflux. When these conditions are at two different levels, what I mean is primary and the second concurrent condition at two different levels, it is easy to diagnose the existence of second one. But when they are at same level, it becomes difficult. It's just to illustrate that this is a 16-day-old child, male child, is sitting quietly, no problem. The moment it is put on its back, it becomes distressful. When I scope the child had very large base tongue cyst and which was pressing onto epiglottis. Here, I was not able to make out whether there was secondary to that cyst, there is posterior collapse epiglottis, or there is associated type 3 laryngomalacia. There is another case of dual pathology. 2-month-old child with weak voice, clubbing of neck, cleft palate, and laryngeal cleft, and history of repeated. That is the laryngeal cleft the child had. And I corrected this after doing tracheostomy. And second day, when I wanted to extubate the child became more distressful. And when I went in again, I saw there was a type 3 laryngomalacia, which I missed. Actually, this cleft he was breathing through the cleft, not the laryngeal inlet. And once I closed it, the laryngomalacia became evident. Then I was forced to do partial epiglotectomy in this patient. And see the truncated epiglottis, and this is the corrected cleft in the same child. Now this child is some 4.5-year-old. A word about laryngopharyngeal reflux. Literature always says there is concurrent occurrence of reflux in cases of laryngomalacia in some 60% of cases. I don't think so. It is not concurrent. It is the result of increased inspiratory effort these children have, causing greater intrathoracic negativity, causing cricopharynx and sphincter and cardiac sphincter to open, allowing the flooding of gastric content into nasopharynx and laryngopharynx, causing adenoidal hypertrophy and supraglottic edema, adding to the already existing obstruction. So, as I said, especially the laryngomalacia, do not require surgical intervention. It's very few, and most of them, almost 80% of them, can be managed conservatively. And what is my role in managing these cases? Yes, I do have a role. I'm the one who decides which particular patient requires surgical intervention. Stridor, the loudness, no, it has no basis. It has, and we also know that type of laryngomalacia has no links with the morbidity the child suffers. For example, this particular child had severe distress, loud stridor and all. I thought there is something very grievous inside. When I scoped the child had only type 1 laryngomalacia, and that was relieved by doing supraglottoplasty. So how I decide? I take into consideration the extent of collapse I find on flexible Scopify, and the sequelae of respiratory obstruction and the feeding difficulty these unfortunate children have. Once I decide to intervene surgically, transoral approach is the preferred way to tackle these upper aerodigestive tract lesions. So far, 172 surgeries. As expected, laryngomalacia is the commonest condition I am operating on. In laryngomalacia, I am doing supraglottoplasty, epiglottopexy. Of late, I started doing a partial epiglotectomy. And in all cases, I do take consent for tracheostomy. Various cysts are marsupialized, bilateral tractor palsies. My preferred way to tackle them is posterior chordotomy, subglottic stenotic webs, radial cut with laser and balloon dilatation, laryngeal clefts repaired, congenital cricoid stenosis, cricoid expansion surgery with the cartilage interposition, and so forth. Few surgical videos, what I'm doing regularly. Supraglottoplasty is the commonest surgical procedure I am doing in laryngomalacia. This child was 21-day-old child with type 2 laryngomalacia, and the flexible scopic finding was very short area epiglottic fold. I always intubate my children, and I use diode 980 nanometer diode laser. This is, I wanted a portable laser. Earlier, I used to go to neonatologist and operate. Nowadays, they come to me. And with diode laser, I have vaporized this and see the achieved lengthening of E fold following the vaporized short epiglottic fold. And I do it on both the sides. You can use CO2 laser, you can use cold instrument, steel instrument, or even debrider for that matter. But it will be very careful when you're using it. I do it on both the sides, and I extubate child on table. Another case, another condition, epiglottopexy. It is suited for type 3 laryngomalacia. It is easier said than done. What we do, this is done for type 3 laryngomalacia, where there is epiglottis prolapses, posterior prolapse of epiglottis in type 3 cases. We create a raw area in the base tongue, vallecula, and adjacent epiglottic area and put a stitch. And nowadays, Lichtenberger needle carrier, we are able to fix the epiglottis to base tongue and the skin, neck outside, and bury the stitch. As I said, it is easier said than done. So I was not able to record this. I have done very few, 3 or 4 only, but I was able to get away with it. It's very difficult, and I was not able to record the video of that. Of late, as I said, I'm doing partial epiglotectomy. I was very reluctant to do this. Rather, I was worried about post-operative aspiration, post-operative feeding difficulty the children would have. But that fear disappeared from my mind when I encountered this child. This is a severe distressed child with type 1 laryngomalacia. What you're seeing is type 1. But if you notice carefully, there's hardly any epiglottis. And I was forced to do supraglottoplasty, and I was worried that there will be post-operative feeding and aspiration and feeding difficulty, as I don't like tracheostomy in such patients. And it did well. There was no post-operative aspiration or feeding difficulty in these patients. So I became bold and I started doing partial epiglotectomy. It is suited for type 3 laryngomalacia. In partial epiglotectomy, I take away the suprahyoid part of epiglottis. It's very handy diode. It's contact laser, diode laser, 980, not as good as CO2, but as I said, it gave me mobility. This is excised, hemostasis achieved. And this is the remaining part of larynx. This is the cleft I have repaired, and the child became more distressed to type 3. So I was forced to do. type 3 epiglottictomy. Post-tracheotomy is my preferred way to tackle idiopathic bilateral abductor palsy. Rather than doing tracheostomy and wait for 2 years for spontaneous recovery. Once I ruled out that there was no neurosurgical condition like hydrocephalus and Arnold-Chiari malformation is not responsible for bilateral abductor palsy, I disjunct membranous cord from the vocal process and I extend the cut up to the lateral wall of laterally up to thyroid lamina. By doing that, I gain extra respiratory space. And in that process, I have not damaged the cricoid arytenoid complex. So whenever the cord recovers, I'm left with very mobile cord and with good voice post-operatively. Base tongue says, this is how a base tongue set looks, but I'll be showing you later. It's in reference to other condition. Fortunately, we were able to intubate. I marked the area of the cap because once it gets deflated, it becomes difficult to know how much to excise. And I decap with debrider. And the remaining secreting surface inside, I destroy with laser. And see, after collapse, the edges come together. There is a chance of reappearance of cyst in such patients. And I tell the neonatologist and the parents about the recurrence and all. They are well informed ahead of, when I take the consent, I write there is a chance of recurrence following surgery. In laryngeal cleft, sorry for the bad video. This first case, a lot of struggle. It's not a simple job. I create a raw area between the cleft, and for this, you need a Parson laryngoscope, a knot pusher, and see that is, I'm putting a stitch. That's knot pusher. And this Parson laryngoscope is wonderful scope. I use it for intubation also. It helps. So in intubation also, prior to surgery, in the beginning of the surgery. A few cases I've done, and this is post-operative videos of them. 3-month-old male child with breathing and feeding difficulty and failure to thrive. This child has had type 1 laryngomalacia. And see the amount of reflux this child had. And this is the follow-up video of the same 6 months following the surgery. Gain in weight, and even mother has put on weight. That's it. Four-day-old male child with severe breathing difficulty and feeding difficulty. This child had type 2 laryngomalacia, and I did supraglotoplasty. Happy family, including the child, and this is what has happened to the supraglottic behavior following supraglotoplasty. It's very easy to notice a hardly any very short area epilotic fold prior to surgery. 6-week-old girl child with feeding difficulty, breathing difficulty, and large cyst, base tongue cyst. And I was sure that this child may be having type 3 laryngomalacia along with this. It's only when I did Marsupial, taken care of cyst, I was sure that there was no associated laryngomalacia. It was just a mass effect. So in newborn and neonates with stridor, it should be investigated on emergent basis, as all stridors are not laryngomalacia, because it is very essential to come to correct diagnosis for favorable outcome. We have no alternative for transnasal bronchoscopy in the management of child with stridor. There can be a concurrent condition which needs to be looked for and addressed. And as I said, laryngopharyngeal reflux is not a concurrent condition, and it should be managed effectively. As I said earlier, I have the role in decision making which particular patient requires. surgical intervention. And in indicated cases, transfer approach is preferred way to tackle this. And I want to elaborate a little here. Even if I encounter a mild case of obstruction, regular follow-up is mandatory. What I mean by that, when child comes to me with stridor, and if I find the child has stridor which was secondary, this holds true for laryngomalacia. Um, doesn't can be managed conservatively, but I insist that regular follow-up is mandatory. Even it is told to my neonatologist, and the parents have to convince, because in good number of cases, almost 25 to 26% of cases, the behavior changes. The mild becomes very severe, and then I am forced to surgically intervene. I also insist on operated cases to be regularly followed. This is what I learned managing cases of laryngomalacia over a period of time. I found laryngomalacia to be having two components. There is one anatomic component and there is a neuromotor component. The anatomic component I correct or rectify surgically. The neuromotor component continues to haunt the child for some more time. And that is the one which is responsible for precipitation of stridor due to vigorous exercise, physical activity, and a bout of respiratory tract infection. And as I said, I'll run the video. See that happiness is seen. That's my success. And this child was 1.5 months when I operated. Now 5-month old. There is no stridor in it. And I always nebulize with xylocaine. And the stridor appears. See the thing which was keeping the laryngopharynx tight. I've knocked it off by surface anesthesia. This is what I mean. The motor component continues to haunt, and these are the people who are going to are vulnerable. There are conditions which can precipitate, as I said earlier, the attack of stridor in these cases. And this is not one-man show. Understand? I have a team other than me, anesthesiologist who understands my patient's need, a group of pediatricians who are convinced about my ability, and a thoracic surgeon and pediatric surgeon who is convinced about the role of ENT surgeon in the management of child with stridor. I wish to conclude my talk with this short video case presentation, which will convince you the role of ENT surgeon and his scope in the flexible scope in the management of congenital stridor and its sequence. This is a 10-month-old child, male child, brought to me for failure to thrive and feeding difficulty. It is one of the twin deliveries. The girl child both weighed 2.8 kilo at birth. And at 10 months, he is 6.2 kilogram in weight. And this man continues to be 3.4. All these 10 months, he was being managed by neonatologist as a case of what you call some metabolic disorder with special diet and so forth. And it just happened that I had seen one case. I have operated 1-month-old child in their family 4.5 years back. So the parents thought, the relatives and parents thought they should take my opinion. And they came to me and I did scopy. And this is, when I put the scope, I found a base tongue cyst there. And it's not what we usually, you saw that cyst. It was something, it was deep seated. And then I confirmed my diagnosis with CT scan. There was a deep seated cyst. And after I confirmed with CT scan, and after confirming with USG that this is not an undescended thyroid, I went ahead and did the marsupialization of, say it is deep seated and it has tiny presence. The rest of thing is buried in the muscle mass. And that's why the neonatologist must have missed it. The blade of Macintosh was pushing it inside, and that's how they missed it. And I did marsupialization. It was, and I told them there will be, it's very deep cyst and all, there will be recurrence. And fortunately, no recurrence in my baseline cyst till today. And this is 8 months after surgery. The child is putting on weight and happy grandma and sister. With this, I wish to end my talk.
Yes, sir. Sir,
Thank you.
I'll bring in the all this thing. Yeah.
So once you
Adil.
stop sharing your screen, sir, then we can have you.
I stop share.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Now, yeah, you are back.
Perfect. Thank you, Dr. Bilgi. Power packed. I must tell you, power packed. It's very precise, very crisp, but the videos can leave anybody spellbound and striderous, if I may say so. So there are quite a lot of questions. I also will put in a lot of things to try and get the right messages out for everybody. Are the others there? Yeah, Sandeep's there. Raman sir is there. His video is not on. And perfect. And Dr. Bilgi, we'd like to have your video on also.
Where I should go? Speaker view? No.
Just next to the speaker, there's a video icon. Just switch it on.
Yeah, let me see whether I blocked it.
I'm going to try and because we need to see this power pack.
Start video.
Yes.
Start video. Yeah, start now. Yes, sir.
We have some time, but we have a lot of questions. So I'm again going to try to do this so that all our audience out there gets the best of the information from all three of you all. But let me first just start with a very simple question, like you put it out in your presentation, that anybody wanting to get into neonatal airway should not be getting into it without the presence of a scope in their own hands, right? So this is one very strong, I'm sure all three of you all will agree to this, very strong message that do not try any jugaad by thinking that, okay, if we don't have this, we'll do this, we'll do that, right?
Yeah.
So can you just go ahead for the sake of the audience and just let us know exactly what scope would you advocate? I'm not talking about the names, I'm not asking.
No. The tiniest possible. I'm able to, I get patients, they are born.
Sir, diameters of the scope.
Yeah, I'll tell you. What scope I have is 3.1 mm scope.
And length?
Length is 30 centimeter.
So a 30 centimeter scope with 3.1 centimeter outer diameter is what is the most advocated by all of you all to start?
Tiniest is one, best. It can go negotiate through the deviated septum also. Okay. I don't, without injuring it. And it is enough. I can put it in adult also if I want.
Yeah, but no, fine. So, but we are giving out a very strong, clear message that without this, don't even try to get into the situation, right?
True.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Now comes the next step. Now the patient has come to you, the child has come to you in your either OPD, IPD kind of a setup with this kind of a striderous situation, and you want to scope. How do you go about scoping this child?
I preferably want the child to be starving, means without feed for some time, 1.5 hours before that.
Let's look at this logistically. They've come to your OPD. You don't know whether they've eaten or not. So if they have fed the child, you're going to wait.
I'm going to wait. I won't, because the moment I sterilize, I anesthetize the thing. If there is regurgitation or the vomit and all, it will get into the airway. I don't want that.
Explain to us the anesthetization procedure for the scopy.
Nebulization. You saw in one of my videos. I just nebulize the and that's enough, more than enough.
Nebulization with
xylocaine, 2% with adrenaline. And with the child is bigger, I do it with 4% xylocaine.
And the rest is just restraining, like we call it.
Yeah, just gently just wrap the child, and I'm able to get inside.
Right, blanket.
No sedation, no atropine, nothing, just works. And this gets over in less than a minute. Okay. I'm doing laryngoscopy, esophagoscopy, bronchoscopy, and also esophagoscopy in one go. My desire is to look for second pathology.
So this would answer Dr. Sisi Patra's question also, because he also asked about which type of anesthesia and whether there is any other way to examine the baby besides NPS.
No. And I'll make it a point to go through both the nasal passages.
Okay.
If there is a unilateral conal atresia, if I I'm able to go to the larynx and see and come out and say, okay, fine. There may be that I'll be missing the unilateral coronal atresia on the right side. So my thing is I restrain, I go through one nasal passage, go up to larynx, and then go from into the other nasal cavity and
So
finish
very important point to make sure that you go through both the ears.
both the nasal passages.
I would also like to bring in Dr. Raman and Sandeep here, Dr. Sandeep, into all this. So please, whenever you all want to make a comment, please raise your hand. So then I will bring on everybody into it. Now we heard from Dr. Bilgi because he is a person who is in a standalone setup with everything under the sun at his disposal within 5 minutes of what he wants. Now we also have a lot of us in this country like you who are institutionalized. And when the child is brought to you in an institutional OPD, there are a lot of logistic issues. Right? So I would like you all to give us your perspective as to what would be your first step. Now with him, it's very simple. He just takes him into the next room and scopes him. Now, how does it work with you? Because there's going to be a time lag. Yeah, please go ahead. Go ahead. Dr. Raman or Dr. Sandeep, you can comment on this.
Yeah, may I start?
Yes,
Yes,
please.
sir. Sure.
Okay. Thank you very much for for allowing me to be part of this excellent talk by Dr. Bilgi. I'll just say a few things which may be slightly different from what he does, but the basic principles on which Dr. Bilgi built up, and I know Dr. Bilgi because every time I go to any airway thing, he's right beside me or in front of me like a shadow or behind me like a shadow. We shadowed each other for many, many years. In fact, there's a lovely picture. If I had known I was joining today, I would have shown you with Dr. Munia many years back in Hyderabad. I don't know whether it's 15 years or 20 years back. We've been following each other since that time. Excellent work he's been doing. Now, the basic principle, as he said, I'm just reiterating, I'm going to say nothing new, is that seeing is believing. And one more thing which has happened in the recent past, especially in the bigger institutions or even in the medium-sized institutions, to send these children for CT scans. It's a big waste of time, money, exposure to radiation in children whose surface area is much less. Hence, the radiation exposure is much more. And be very careful about taking children with airway problems into a CT suite. You know, problems can occur there. We had a child whom we had sent for some external compression on the trachea downstairs for the radiology, and the child had a problem. Luckily, we saved the child. So that's another additional burden. And when you do any of those things, please keep an artificial airway support system on the side. I'm just trying to mention those things which are slightly different or which Dr. Bilgi would have experienced, but not, I mean, a short half an hour talk, you can't mention everything. There's other important thing that's slightly different we do is we do the flexible laryngoscopy, of course, but then we do it in three kind of stages. There are children, like Dr. Seema very rightly mentioned, they come in the morning, you need to do something, they're from a nearby city or they don't have the provision to stay in the same place. We quickly do a awake flexible laryngoscopy, sometimes transorally. It gives you a screening. You know, it's in the OPD, just open the child's mouth, use your finger, just open up the mouth there. As it is toothless, they won't bite off your scope. Just go there, and the larynx is highly placed at a much higher level in these children, just behind the tongue. A gross examination. Tell them, okay, you can come after some time, or you can come after a week, because so many other issues are involved. That is one. Secondly, whenever we do a flexible laryngoscopy these days, being in an institution, we do most of the more serious cases in the pediatric emergency room. I'm a person who's a person who doesn't have too much confidence in myself. I'm a really scared surgeon. I'm happy I'm a scared surgeon when I deal with these neonates, because anything can go wrong at any time. Vagal stimulation, sometimes touching the epiglottis, anywhere you can have vagal stimulation. So I do it in the presence of at least a senior registrar of the intensive care group standing by me, because you're looking at something, concentrating on something, and something else goes wrong, then you won't have the wherewithal to deal with those things. We have a specially trained sister. Now we've elevated it into a airway screening clinic in our pediatric emergency room. I think that's the next way to move forward. So that is one thing. And secondly, we initially do awake laryngoscopy, and subsequent to that, if necessary, at the same sitting, if possible, we also give a mild sedation. I've seen a lot of videos from a lot of doctors where the child is constantly crying. You can't even make out laryngomalacia. A child should have gentle breathing.
That sedation that you're talking about, sir, is given by you, or you will keep a standby anesthetist for that?
For for what? For these
Sedation.
For the
Oh,
sedation.
sedation. No. This is done by the pediatric intensivists. You
Intensive.
see,
Okay.
anesthetist means you go to the theater. I'm sorry, I'm talking about tertiary care center. We built
No,
it up
that's
over
the
some time.
reason I wanted to bring out this difference. I want to bring out the difference between a standalone and a tertiary care referral center.
So we're trying to move more and more towards what is ideal. I'll stop at that and let the other people give their comments, and I'll butt in.
That's why. So Sandeep, you would agree, add on, say something?
I think what sir has mentioned, Dr. Raman has mentioned is absolutely right. But we have a different scenario in our institute. We have a huge advanced pediatric center, APC, which is known as in the colloquial terms, Bachon Ka Hospital. It's a building in itself in PGI. So all the children by default come to that advanced pediatric center.
Okay.
And so we are directly not we are not the first person seeing those
The first
patients,
people. Yeah.
those children. So by the time we are called, either the child has been intubated or scoped or whatever, then we have to rely on those findings. So it all depends at what stage have we been called. Sometimes we are directly called for a tracheostomy because the child is in so much of distress. We cannot wait at that time. So the idealistic situation is not there in spite of being a tertiary care center because of these logistic problems.
But have you had discussions with your pediatric colleagues and said that before you send us a call for a tracheostomy, just straight away intubate? Or do they call you just straight for a tracheostomy?
No. Sometimes, usually first they would have intubated the child, only then they would call us.
They will call for a tracheostomy.
Yeah. So, but once the child is intubated, there's a lot of edema, and we are not able to see a nascent field there, what was there, why it occurred, and all those things.
So this is the difference which I think the audience has to understand when you're talking about working in a standalone setup versus a bigger setup, where a lot of other logistics, and of course we are not even going to discuss the cost because that's a never-ending discussion in our country. So let's not discuss cost as a factor at all. Dr. Subhash Bhatta wants to know whether using the diode laser for a supraglottoplasty, does it have a higher chance of causing surrounding tissue damage and edema?
No, not at all. I've been using it for last, yeah.
He also wants to know your experience on a unilateral supraglottoplasty.
See, this procedure hardly takes less than 15 minutes. You hardly lose anything by doing the on other side. I've never done it because most of the patients who reach me, they are not going to die. The severe ones will succumb to the congenital condition. So it hardly takes. It was real-time video what you saw. It's hardly, I must have. And diode, 980 nanometer diode is very good, and you should. Every laser has its own, like even if you use Caesar and all, if it is too blunt and all, you'll do more damage than in a sharp one.
So I'm taking questions as they come, and intermittently I will bring in. Yes, Sandeep.
I would just like to add one thing in this, that personally I have not, we don't have a diode laser. We have not been using a diode laser, but I don't know whether sir has tried. We are using a MLW wand for doing our supraglottoplasties. It's, I would say it is very, very convenient, It's really convenient. No problems with the laser equipment and tubing and all this. It hardly takes about 3 to 4 minutes for the whole procedure to be over.
Agreed.
We'll also come to a discussion.
Yes, just one more. Yeah, I'll add something. What sir said, yes. Aurangabad, the Marathwada is the cursed place on earth. Very poor. Wand itself costs 25,000 rupees. I finished everything in 25,000 rupees. And I wanted, when I started my practice, I wanted mobility. The diode laser costed only 17 lakhs, whereas the CO2 was costing much. So because my neonatologist wanted me to come to their center and do it because they never thought. Once I started giving them results, then I became a little, I said, okay, now you start sending me cases and all. That's how things started. Wand is good. Wand is very good, sir.
Questions first, and then we will try and address all the questions. There's a comment by Dr. Sanjeev Kolar when he says that you should try injecting methylene blue in the cyst. I think he is referring to the epiglot
Yeah.
that you mentioned about.
But when, can I answer that?
Yeah, it's a comment, so there's no
Yeah.
question.
Okay. I don't do it. That's it.
Is there any preference? Nagarjuna Reddy, Dr. Nagarjuna Reddy wants to know the preference on the types of laryngoscopes for different cases. But I would suppose that at that age, there shouldn't be a preference. I guess all would be the same.
The thinnest possible one.
Then it's possible. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thinnest
No,
possible one. The
yes.
only problem is, yeah, sir, Raman sir wants to add something.
That's what I was saying. But what I got from the question is I'm thinking that he's asking about the rigid laryngoscopes. He's not talking about the flexible ones.
See, the moment that when you see the laryngeal dynamics, and especially in disease, if you try to open the mouth and all, no, you miss that. It's a bridled view. When you can see larynx in its unbridled view, the behavior, its disease in health and disease, then you can plan. Depending on the flexible scopic finding, you can target which tissue, you can decide which tissues to be targeted. Then you get good thing. You can't. There's nothing Macklin laryngoscope and no. Transnasally, fine.
Dr. Raman, you wanted to add something?
From what I understand, the person wants to know which rigid laryngoscope to use. I'll just answer that. The Parsons one, which Dr. Bilgi used, an extremely wonderful one because it's got a side slit. You can take the instrument in and out. It's got a little disadvantage because the tongue, part of the tongue juts into that area.
Yes.
So Benjamin Lindholm is what we use these days. It's extremely good. There are two sizes, one for very small children and one slightly larger size. So one you can use till about 8-9 months. The other one you can use for slightly older children. It's extremely good, wide, and it pushes the tongue away. And you can, most of the time, we put it behind the tongue, leaving the epiglottis open so that you can see it. But there are occasions when you want to go deeper, you can put it posterior to the epiglottis also. It's absolutely atraumatic beak it's got. I would recommend that. But these instruments are expensive, and I'm sure Indian manufacturers do have copies of these, and that would be ideal according to me. But both are good.
For instrumentation, nothing. I feel value for money is stores. Everything, scopes.
So we are discussing rigid ones. So
rigid ones.
Okay.
Even those Lindol made by Santosh and Lindol made by stores, definitely it's a different game.
So we've answered Dr. Sanjeev Gola's question about performing the NPL. Dr. Prakash Munka sir wants to know about the pre-op investigation for laryngomalacia. But we'll hold on to this. I am noting this down because when we come to the surgical part, I will pull that in. We've answered Dr. Subhash Bhatta about examining baby airways. Is tracheostomy a must in all these cases? Is a question that has been asked by somebody on an iPad.
Who wants? Okay.
Any one of you can take this because I think the answer is quite obvious that it's not really a must for a lot of cases. Let me rephrase that question to you all. In which patient would you do a tracheostomy?
When can I go ahead? Yeah.
Please.
See, when they reach me, they have disease, but there is no urgent need of tracheostomy. For laryngomalacia, I have never done a tracheostomy, except with that short neck webbing and all. I was not able to expose the larynx well, and I was not able to put, and the anesthetist was losing because of the cleft. So I was forced to do tracheostomy. That is the only case where I did tracheostomy. And laryngomalacia per se, you'll never need a tracheostomy. You have doubt, you just go inside. No, there is no need of tracheostomy.
So, Sandeep, the ones that you get called for tracheostomy, what are the indications for these for tracheostomy?
Those patients, once the patient has been already intubated, there is so much of edema. So they were all intubated. So that is why, like, they were not tracheostomized, they were all intubated basically. So, and the tracheostomized patients were not for laryngomalacia. They for palatal cord palsies or jaw.
Right. Yeah. Any other reason why, sir, you would do a tracheostomy, Dr. Raman?
See, basically, tracheostomy should be avoided at all costs in laryngomalacias. Having said that, like Dr. Sandeep was saying, what happens is we have different scenarios, as Seema also said. See, one is Dr. Bilgi, who has his independent practice. Dr. Sandeep has in an institutional practice, but with a wide hinterland. He gets patients from all over, probably Punjab, Haryana, etc., etc.
Yeah.
So we are like neither a horse nor a donkey. We are a mule. The reason being, I work in a private hospital, but all our AWAC work is done almost 90% free of cost. Now, we've been doing this for 19, 20 years, so people have realized that cost is not the consideration. That is number one. But again, see what happens in probably Chandigarh is that by the time patient reaches Dr. Sandeep,
It's already late.
Lost your audio. We've lost your audio. Okay, till he gets his connection done, we'll continue.
the person who sees things that's
no.
centers, I'll just finish out 1 second, is the advances in non-invasive ventilation. This is an extremely wonderful thing that's happened in neonatology, where even the neonatologists are reluctant to unnecessarily intubate. So the trauma, the burden of tracheostomy has gone down. So these patients can be, and then of course you have these ambulances which can cart patients to whichever place that is there. So with non-invasive ventilation and some kind of a support, they reach us these days. But all our patients, by and large, 90% of them come from neonatologists or pediatricians. We are not directly involved with any noisy breathing at all, almost 100%, I would say.
Yeah, so that very well answers my question, because one of the questions that I had here was to ask all of you all that intermittent time between the patient reaching you and by the time you actually get into definitive treatment. I think that's where the major role of non-invasive ventilation comes in. That's what I wanted to bring out for the audience.
Yeah, I want to add one thing.
Yes, sir.
I did mention in my talk, I do 4 procedures in laryngomalacia: supraglottoplasty, epiglotopexy, partial epiglotectomy, and in all cases, I do take consent for tracheostomy. Why? As I said, there is an anatomic component and the neuromotor component. You may have corrected that. If there is a neuromotor thing, there will be no benefit to this patient. So then you are left with tracheostomy only. But fortunately for me, till today, there was no need for me to do tracheostomy in these cases.
So since you brought up that point, I'll take that thing right now only because that came to my mind while you were talking, and I'm sorry, but I cannot help but correlate this with OSA, because there is a neuromuscular component and there's an obstructive component. So my question to you would be in a similar manner, that is there any way for you to assess the neuromuscular component in a neonate, number one? And number two, would you have ever, or do you have ever had any instances where you would say that, okay, this neuromuscular component seems to be pretty bad, it's not worth taking the risk of morbidity to do the correction for the anatomical obstruction in this child?
Can I go ahead?
Yeah, please. This will be open to all.
Yeah. I somehow, with almost 900 plus cases of obstructed airway, I'm saying right from birth to 8-year-old till they get adenoids and all. There's a growing realization in me that the seeds of OSA are laid down in infancy only. I have a talk of it. I can prove it. If you give me 1 hour, I'll convince you that yes, it is not. I call it infant OSA, the missing link. And my OSA is not just adenoidectomy, tonsillectomy. It starts from birth. It's a huge topic. We'll have one more session. I'll request Prahlada for that and with neonatal. Sir, Sandeep sir, you agree with me?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. In fact, this is the most important thing that we are missing. We are always talking about T&A, T&A.
Yeah.
And another point which you brought about it is that reflux is because of this
obstruction,
not because the reflux is
the two different conditions.
Yes.
So, but is there any way to judge that? Yes, Dr. Rahman,
yes.
To judge this?
A couple of things about this neuromuscular issue. Of course, there are children with these things are obvious in the sense there is lack of muscle tone in these children. They also have a lot of feeding difficulties because it's combined along with laryngomalacia or whatever they also could have in coordination while of the swallowing part. That is the second thing. Thirdly, I find this, of course, has been Donna Thompson's study on laryngomalacias. There are children who have neuromuscular problems. I wouldn't say that don't do a aryepiglotoplasty on them. I would do an aryepiglotoplasty, but the prognosis would be more guarded. You see, they do not recover immediately. They may take some time. As the neuromuscular development improves, then they improve. So they are the ones who continue to have a little bit of a swallowing problems or intermittent stridor because of the floppiness, because of the neuromuscular problem, not because of the shortened aryepiglottic folds. So it takes a little longer time. I would still offer, in case I'm convinced that there is laryngomalacia, just do this. Like Dr. Belgi said, it's relatively a simple operation. The only difference between Dr. Belgi's technique and our technique is we do it without a tube. The tube is lying in the nasopharynx. People very picturesquely call it the nasopharyngeal trumpet. So the child is breathing spontaneously because you've got more space there. Of course, you require an anesthetist who believes in that and gives you support. That's all anesthetic jadoo magic there. And then you have the whole larynx to you. And of course, you can use laser, you can use cold or whatever, it's already been discussed. Each one has its benefits. And of course, we do all with CO2 laser. But then if one is as experienced as Dr. Belgi and knows when to stop, you know, these things are dangerous. In the early stages, we've had laser being used in the larynx from multiple good institutions in India because somebody was probably just learning how to use it. So be very careful. It's not the instrument, but the man behind the instrument which makes it.
So I think I'm going back with a take-home message, which I'm sure I think for the audience also you're telling this only, that the neuromuscular incoordination component should not in any way prevent you from doing the surgery if required. Am I quite clear?
Yes.
Out of this webinar? So that will be a post-op related issue which you need to keep a watch on. Perfect. Dr. Anirvan Vishwas is complimenting you, Dr. Belgi, for the presentation and also mentions about the coblation. We've discussed that. Dr. Patra's answer on anesthesia has been done. Okay, now we come to Dr. Prakash Munka, who's asking about both these things. One is the assessment protocol in such children and about the pre-operative investigations for laryngomalacia. Now, in the assessment protocol, I would like all three of you all to give me a very clear-cut idea as to now, what is the role of imaging in assessment? Since everything is visual and we are going to see it with the eyes, so what is the role of imaging in these children? Yeah, please, all three of you all. I want all three.
You saw that video, that twin delivery.
Yes.
That was the only time I did CT scan. Otherwise, all these pathologies are intraluminal. You can see it. And when you are doing it in awake patient, the scopy, you can see the behavior. You can see the mass going inside, the arytenoid falling down, or the epiglottis getting sucked into that. I don't think there is any need. The cyst also, as you saw, it's like that frog's belly thing pouting inside. And even the unilateral ones, bilateral ones, there's no need. Imaging study is essential. Like I said, I should, when I have a bilateral abductor palsy case, I take neurologist opinion. I do CT scan to rule out hydrocephalus or Arnold Chiari malformation. That's all. Or neck and where posterior fossa, there is any reason for it. Otherwise, I hardly require. History is must. And other investigations, whether even if the child is a newborn, is hardly 1 day, 2 day, 3 day, he's okay. And my procedure lasts for less than 15 minutes. So I just relieve the obstruction and he takes off in his life.
I think, can I say?
Yeah, Sandeep, go ahead, then we'll come to Dr. Raman.
Yeah, so what I feel is, if the symptoms and the presentation of the child does not go with the findings what you see with your scope, that is the time when you need to go for imaging.
Very wonderfully put.
Absolutely agree with you. And when you are suspecting external compression,
yes,
then imaging is very, very important.
So intraluminally, if you find something which requires to really see the extent, and if there is a mismatch in the findings.
And secondly, as Dr. Belgi pointed out, there is synchronous lesions in 20 to 50% of the cases. So you must examine. Just because you see laryngomalacia, unfortunately now has become the dumping ground diagnosis. They usually, when somebody who's inexperienced, they immediately say there is laryngomalacia, there's tracheomalacia, everything is there. And then
laryngomalacia.
But that's a learning curve. We also used to do the same thing earlier. Probably we are wiser now, and hopefully a lot of us will get trained.
Anything we want to add in terms of what Dr. Munka wants to know about pre-operative assessment? So is there anything different from a routine?
we assess the child. If I may I?
Yeah, please, sir, please.
Yeah. So what we do, since our specialized airway clinic for noisy breathing in children we have, and since what we do is, one is we observe the child clinically when the child is crying, when the child is sleeping, and when the child is feeding. All these are the three activities the child does at this particular age. And sometimes you may have oxygen desaturation in only one of these three things. So we keep the child for almost half a day and in the pediatric ER and observe the child's oxygenation during all these three activities. That is number one. Number two, these days we are getting a lot of these, some of these children, especially when you want to make sure whether you need to operate, not to operate, what is the severity. We do also an echocardiogram just to rule out pulmonary hypertension. You see, prolonged laryngomalacia, obstructed breathing also reflects, of course, it takes some time for it to manifest, but that's another, these are one of the two additional points that we do. And there's a whole list of things we do, maybe some other day we can discuss.
Okay.
Just a moment. This cardiorespiratory problem secondary to obstructed airway takes some time to manifest. Okay, that is one. Second thing is, it shouldn't appear too unrealistic. Most of my patients are below month. So I really don't know. Yesterday I operated 2 cases, today and yesterday. Laryngomalacia, 23-day-old children and all. So
I think we'll come to that at the end. I have a point on that. So Dr. Dhanya Rajan wants to know if there's any waiting for the milder stages of laryngomalacia.
Yeah, as I said, regular follow-up.
For how long?
It can change its nature, and then you have to see how the growth pattern is. It is falling short of its normal growth pattern.
How frequent would
I continue till the child is 2-year-old.
No, how frequent would you want them to visit?
I want them to come as much as possible, as early as possible. Every month, every second month, they come to me, and they come religious. If you convince them, they come.
Okay, you have compliments again from Dr. Vijay Vitore and from Dr. Prabhakar Tejankar for all of you. And Dr. Shashi Elwar is asking about coblation, which we've already discussed. It's a good tool nowadays. Everybody is using that. Mandar is also sending you compliments. Dr. Subhash is again asking about, can we find out associated anomalies with the nasopharyngoscopy, like below the vocal cords? I think the answer is very obviously yes, because if you
go below the cord.
Yeah. So I think we'll leave that.
Except for the laryngeal cleft, which requires confirmation with a rigid scope.
Okay.
Agreed.
Again, Dr. Elwar is sending his compliments and asking you about glidoscope. Do any of you use a glidoscope?
I don't know what is it.
Then we'll keep it till the end.
Raman sir, you may be knowing.
I think this is the video laryngoscope is what I think they're talking about.
Okay.
And
Sandeep sir may be knowing. Institutional people may be having.
Any of these things you use with a rigid instrument, it stents the larynx. So to assess laryngomalacia, no.
Okay, so people who have commented, Dr. Kamaluddin and all, about the fact that cold steel also gives results. But again, these are age-old things where the very simple statement always goes there. It's the man behind the tool and not the tool. So there is a question again from Dr. Bhatta about the fact that can we go with unilateral supraglottoplasty? I think
you can.
You already answered.
You can. But you hardly need extra time. It's not a life-saving. He's already intubated or saturation is maintained. You have spent 5 minutes doing one side, another 3 minutes for the next side. There's no extra.
We have Dr. Shashikant from Saudi Arabia. So he obviously has the usual problems that a lot of doctors in the Gulf would have in terms of permissions from their institutes. And he's also asked about glidoscope, which we've just answered for you, Dr. Shashikant. And Dr. Anandita Das wants to know about tracheostomy on a child with severe stridor. I think we've already answered that, unless somebody has to make a comment about severe stridor. I don't think there's any gradation for stridor as such as we know, right? A lot would depend on the desaturation. Am I correct in saying that?
Yeah. Yes.
Okay. Desaturation, the indrawing, the retractions, the type of breathing, many things are there. That's a whole slightly different topic.
Dr. Chandar from Botswana has sent regards to Dr. Raman, Dr. Hilwar. So I'm just going down and taking questions as they come. Tracheostomy for a child, small child at odd hours for a distressed child. What should be the approach? This is a question to starting from Sandeep, but I think Sandeep has answered that. But go ahead, Sandeep. Dr. Munka wants to know what is the approach at odd hours for a small child.
No, but if child is intubated, there should not be a need for a tracheostomy at an odd hour.
Okay.
They can always wait for the
Okay. Again, a lot of compliments from Dr. Deepika Baroa. Good presentation. Dr. Anirban Vishwas has come up with another question where he's talking about how to diagnose a case of comorbid conditions along with the anatomical abnormalities and how to proceed in those comorbid conditions.
Now it's difficult to understand. What does that mean?
He wants to know how will you diagnose comorbid conditions, or rather, I would put it in a slightly different
I go back to, I send back to the child to neonatologist. Like if I find some trachea being pressed, so I tell them to have cardiac study and all, some cardiomegaly or some mediastinal mass and all, or some other comorbidities. And only when they say it is okay, it's only laryngeal thing, they come back to me again. Otherwise, as I said, it's a joint effort. It's not me alone. I involve my neonatologist, I involve my anesthesiologist in treating such patients.
So I guess all the others will also agree with the same?
Yeah.
Yeah. I just confirmed the answer I gave for the GlideScope is correct. Yeah, GlideScope is a video laryngoscope. Sure. So to repeat again, because it stents the airway, so it doesn't give you a real picture.
Yeah.
Charu is listening in and giving a lot of compliments to Dr. Bilagi, whom he otherwise kids a lot about him having a tongue tie. So he's kind of appreciating your ability to talk fluently today. Okay, Dr. Shashi Hilwar also from sending you greetings from Saudi and saying he's listening in, all three of y'all. History of stridor since birth is very important in laryngomalacia. I don't think any one of us would differ.
It never manifests at birth, that is for sure.
Okay,
it
now
takes some time.
One point, roughly around 2 weeks is when it manifests and comes to whichever doctor is taking care. One more point, I don't know, Dr. Bilgi, I saw your series, and the other day I was with Dr. Vidyasagar on one more webinar. Somehow we don't find vocal cord palsy is the number 2 cause in our country. It comes much lower. Again, I think it depends on whether you have a very busy cardiothoracic program going on, I think. I don't know. What are your comments?
Unilateral ones or bilateral?
Unilateral ones with the cardiac people.
Unilateral ones are
logical.
No, I do get them, but I keep seeing them. Unilateral ones are the one usually they get missed. They really don't have too much of stridor, or they just have weak voice.
No, is it the second commonest cause is what I'm asking?
Yeah. For me, yes. I see both. I see good number of unilateral calls.
It was lower. It was not number 2.
No, it was number 2 only.
Is that right? Okay.
Yes.
We see it much very less often.
Yeah. Of late, I started seeing more of interarrhythmic clefts rather than the first 3 ones, subglottic stenosis, pulses, and now I'm seeing more of clefts. My awareness and I angle it such way so I can see the cleft by scopy only.
Okay, so Dr. Prakash Dond is also complimenting all 3 of yours. Now, I had 1 or 2 very important questions kept for me at the end before I finish all of that. But, we have Dr. Venus Patel who has joined, and very intelligently she has beaten me to the question that I really wanted to ask. So, Dr. Venus, this is for you, a very, very pertinent question that she's asking up here. That so you mentioned very clearly that laryngomalacia, you're going to wait frequently and keep watching. And we also know that very less number of laryngomalacics need surgery. So when will you finally consider surgery for laryngomalacia after a prolonged follow-up? So you've been following up the patient. So you've decided first evaluation, he doesn't need surgery. So let me ask a little bit expansion to her question. Laryngomalacia, when will you decide on surgery? Number two, if you decide to wait and keep following up, when is the next stage you'll decide on surgery? And my question, which I had kept to you as an extension for this, because I saw on your slides, Dr. Belgi, you mentioned about you will decide on surgery based on 3 points. I forgot the third point. One was the extent of the laryngomalacia.
Collapse and the sequelae of obstruction,
the length
and the failure to thrive, feeding difficulty and failure to thrive.
So length of obstruction, difficulty in eating, and the degree of collapse, right?
No, not the length of obstruction, the sequelae of obstruction.
You mentioned something about the extent of obstruction. No.
Extent of collapse, okay. Supraglottic collapse.
Okay, so just elaborate on all these three things now. When will you first decide to do surgery for
you see a child just with stridor, and the child is able to feed itself well, is putting on weight, there is no breathing difficulty, no feeding difficulty.
Weight right in the beginning, no? You've just seen the child.
No. Every stridor child I spoke.
Okay.
Whether I'm convinced the child is.
You're talking about history. You're talking about history.
My Aurangabad is sensitized. Any stridor gets referred to me. That is true. There is a growth chart. You have pediatrician friend. Okay. You have pediatrician friend. They have that growth chart. In the immunization chart, there is a growth chart. And they plot the weight and all. If you fall below that, that is the failure to thrive. You're not keeping up the thing and all. So when I see the child, I send back the patient to the neonatologist. He keeps an account of that and all. And the parents are convinced. I show them what goes wrong, what can go wrong if you don't treat it. They're convinced. And the moment they don't now, once they see me, they don't go back to neonatologist or pediatrician. They come back.
I agree. Let me cut you here. Again, the questions that I'm asking are exactly as per your slide. On what basis do you decide how much collapse warrants that? Failure to thrive, you've already mentioned that.
Depending on apnea, respiratory arrest, failure to thrive, feeding difficulty, child chokes while suckling.
So these are all indicators.
All this, yeah.
Operate. Okay.
Yeah, operate.
Or if there is a heart problem associated, maybe cor pulmonale or something.
Okay, so along with associated comorbidities, cardiovascular. Now come to venous part of the question, that after a prolonged follow-up, when do you then decide, okay, now this is not working, wait and watch is not working, now I have to take up the patient for surgery?
Yes, I do that.
Again, the same
same parameters are applied.
Okay, perfect.
We did an analysis of our patients and we found most of the patients, almost the earliest they come is around 2 weeks by the time they talk to their, other doctors and things like that. And most of our surgeries we've done around 2 months, but there are some children where we do after 4 months if the weight gain is not sufficient. In between, they seem to improve a little bit, but again, because the metabolic demands, multiple feeds, they can't cope up with the breathing, swallowing problem is interfered with because of the suck swallow reflex part is interfered because of the breathing issue. So once it affects the growth of the child, that's between 2 months to 4 months. That is another screening time, and again around 8 months. We normally see our children between 2 to 3 months intervals in those where we cannot decide whether to do something or not.
Okay. Perfect. So I think we should be just the last few questions I will take, and then we will wind up because we are also way past our time. There is a question here that I happen to see. Okay, Dr. Munka again wants to know that since we discussed no role of imaging, so even a simple basic X-ray is of no help, he wants to ask.
No, of course, no. I don't. Plain X-ray, no.
Okay. And then we have again Dr. Sisir Patra asking about, does stridor in the first week of birth straight away rule out laryngomalacia by default?
It never comes at birth. As the child grows, the metabolic demands grow. He starts breathing more vigorously. That is the time when the supraglottic, which is flaccid, starts getting sucked into. That is when it manifests. So yes, at birth it is not. And these children will continue to be asymptomatic when they are sleeping, where their demand of respiration is less. The moment they are vigorous and all, active, crying and all, that is the time that they manifest. Understand?
Sandeep, you want to add something?
See, usually the laryngomalacia was not present at birth. If there is stridor at birth, we should be looking at some other cause, maybe some injury, external compression, forceps delivery,
Yes.
cord palsy, something of that sort. Like.
Agreed.
That's a very important point that is brought up.
But again, there are no absolute hard and fast rules. So there are, but basically what has been said by the other panelists.
Sir, I'm loving this. No hard and fast rule. Remind me of OSC all the time. I'm just loving this.
Yeah.
Dr. Prahlad, unfortunately, Dr. Suhail has not been able to join us.
Yeah. He's busy somewhere. It's okay.
The end of it. And there's a question from Dr. Rupa Parekh where she wants to know that ultimately what percentage, I mean, you can give a rough arbitrary percentage unless there is something in literature for it. What percent of cases of laryngomalacia eventually do need surgery?
20%?
20%.
Okay.
20%.
Yeah. To be one caveat, it used to be 10%.
I have seen.
Your audio is again gone, Raman sir.
I have seen 238 cases of laryngomalacia, wherein 94 cases were operated.
More and more and antenatal facilities.
But it is not a true sample of the laryngomalacia floating in the society.
No, it's an approximate.
It is, yeah, the whatever cases I see, like I told you, I operated 172 cases, 94 were laryngomalacia. If you go back to the site, yes, 278 cases of laryngomalacia I found in those 700 cases. So it's not the true sample.
We lost your voice. You were saying something. We lost your voice.
Me, is it?
Yes.
Yeah, we lost your voice. You were saying something.
I said earlier, 10% was the figure for surgical intervention. Now it has gone up to 20% because a lot of low birth weight babies are surviving. Earlier, they used to die. They are surviving, so we have more of these cases who require intervention.
So the relativity is increased.
Yeah, because of antenatal, neonatal facilities.
Wonderful, wonderful. So I think we are at the end of this, and I would like to thank each one of you for beautifully answering and getting out the right points. Let me just try and give a little small 2-minute summary before I thank each one of y'all individually. So we are telling everybody that this is a field which is extremely, important to not get into without a flexible nasopharyngoscope, preferably of the 3.1 centimeter external.
Smaller ones are available.
Yeah, okay. And a 40 centimeter in length. And we make sure that imaging has very little role to play in this, even basic x-rays or things, except for the fact when you really have some intraluminal cysts or lesions that have got extrinsic compression. So the minute you get your child in your hand, the first thing, scope as early as you can, depending on your setups, and as safely as you can, with preferably the kind of simple nebulization anesthesia and then wrapping in a blanketed situation. And in the intermittent stage between the time that you're taking your decision, the non-invasive ventilation would come in very handy, where you wait. And the basic, more important fact of the entire matter is laryngomalacia is not a life-threatening emergency where every one of you should just wait and watch, unless the few points that have been put across where it is important to either tracheotomize or then go ahead and operate based on the extent of collapse and the failure to thrive related issues. So these are the only cases where laryngomalacia needs to be operated. The various beautiful procedures you've elaborated and illustrated with your videos were spellbounding. So everybody knows the kind of procedures that we are planning to do in the supraglottoplasties and everything else, depending on whether it's plain laryngomalacia or associated other etiological causes. And preferably, the tool that is used would depend on what you have available to you. Everybody believes in now probably moving towards a coblator, which is better, but lasers were the ones that were used. Contact lasers. I don't see any role much here of CO2 lasers and non-contact lasers. Is that right? Yes.
CO2 to fix and get the target area in the line of attack is very difficult. This becomes easy. It's very easy. I have the deflectable
Now
instrument.
you get the CO2 with a fiber probe. So even
Yeah,
that
that's it. But it's very expensive. The fiber itself is 50,000 rupees.
yes. So of course, again, the expense part we will not get into right now.
I'm a poor man's surgeon,
Not at all.
and I'm a middle class man. I like to save money everywhere.
Not at
And
all.
Rich doctor who looks after poor patients.
No,
yeah.
the
And second thing, I missed Prahlad. I'm the only person I'm scared in this audience is Prahlada. He's a very knowledgeable character. I was afraid
no.
of him. Yeah,
No,
please.
I'm just enjoying the the practical wisdom pouring in from all directions here,
the
and this what
wise
is
people always sit
impression
quiet
of
and listen, and that's what he's been doing. The wise people are just listening.
What
yeah.
nonsense.
I think that kind of summarizes everything where, this is how you approach the child or a neonatal situation, and the number of surgeries required should be as minimal unless there is a definitive cause. And the point about the neuromuscular issues have also come up over here. And that is the reason why Dr. Belgi loves to come to our OSA workshops in here, because there is a lot of simile and analogy over there. So with this, thank you very much. Thank you, Sandeep. Thank you for taking the time out. Chandigarh in the evening, I know, is probably the best place to be in. And you've spent and given us your time. So thank you very much with
No,
valuable
thank you so much.
inputs that you have brought
Very
in.
good moderation, Seema.
I would like
Congratulations.
to
Yeah.
Sir,
see.
and thank you, Dr. Raman, because Dr. Raman also have been with over a decade now, and we've kind of, and I'm amazed at the way he meticulously does his academic stuff. And I remember Dr. Raman from the days when, he used to be talking about acute otitis media and was bringing out guidelines on acute otitis media. So from there to here, tremendous journey together. With Dr. Bilgi, of course, like I said in my introduction to him, we go a long way together. And this is Peshwe saluting you once again, sir, from what we do. And Dr. Prasad, as always, amazingly academic, well organized with everything. And I really thank you for giving us this opportunity to bring out this particular field.
Rather, I must thank all of you. I would like to inform you that there were 120 participants from 27 countries, from Bali to Britain. From Bali to Britain. That's really, great. I mean, everybody has appreciated the program, and, everybody has said that, commented that one of the most practical program, teaching, one of the best teaching program they had on this. See, many of them have asked for the, the YouTube video. If you permit, I will post it on my channel. If all of you
I think you should. I really think you should.
Yeah, because one of the best discussions we had today. Yeah. Thank you very much, all of you.
Thank you, sir.
And I think we should have a series on pediatric OSAs as Bilgi sir wanted it. We will have that. And if Raman sir is willing, under his stewardship, I think we should have an instruction course on pediatric airway. He should take lead. I'm ready to help him with all the technical aspects. I think we'll plan it out. We'll discuss and plan it out, sir.
Sure.
I really envy EV Raman. He is my guru, somehow Dronacharya for me and all. I envy the setup he's trapped in. I envy everything, right anesthetics, everything is right.
No, what we should appreciate is, despite being in a corporate hospital, he's been able to help these patients with totally free of cost. Many of these patients. That is something, that is something commendable, which is not easy in a corporate hospital.
Yeah, true.
I think that is because of his stand, there. His standing.
Because of him. Because of him, he was able to convince the corporate body to be charitable.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you all for a wonderful program. We'll keep meeting again. Okay. Thank you very much. Yeah.
Bye, Seema. Thank you so much.
Bye. Stay safe. Stay home. Okay. Take care.
Kaljit tagolre.